Okay, so today I want to talk about the barriers and the cost of economic development. First off, remember, a barrier is something that is a block or it gets in the way. And so we're talking about what gets in the way of countries trying to develop. So what we know is um, essentially that the world is structured in a way that the economies of the world for the disadvantaged LEDCs or the periphery countries of the world, they are not supposed to overcome a lot of the barriers that they have. The social conditions in these countries are extremely poor. Political conditions are extremely poor. And so all of these things compound to make more and more barriers for these LEDCs to develop. Um, what we know is that many of these countries, their life expectancies are extremely low. They have to deal with diseases like malaria, AIDS, sometimes like the sleeping sickness. There are a wide variety of issues that they're having to deal with. Also, their governments are have crippling amounts of debt, or there's a lot of corruption or political instability. And so what we know is that the only way that they can develop involves systemic change within their governments and their economic systems. And those things don't come without an excessive cost. And so some of the barriers that we see, first off, one of them is that they have really low levels of social welfare. What that means, guys, is that these countries are suffering from having extremely high birth rates. They don't have access to contraception like we do. Life expectancies are low. They don't get basic health care like vaccinations. They don't get a regular checkup if they have something going on. A lot of times you'd be surprised. They don't even get, things like alcohol to clean out wounds or antibiotic ointment and band-aids to keep wounds clean or to help them heal. They also have very high dependency ratios, which means there are a lot of children in relationship to the number of workers. And what that does is that puts a strain on the overall economy. Infant mortality rates are high. There are a lot of babies born. Child mortality rates are high. And both of those things mean that there are a lot of babies and children who don't make it very long into their lifespan. Of course, they don't have access to education like you and I do. They're lucky if they get to go to school, even just through elementary school. And when they do, oftentimes they don't have very good teachers. They don't have the infrastructure to provide things like sewage systems or clean sanitary water. Remember, we saw a video a little bit back talking about women and the fact that women around the world spend like 1 billion hours a year just carrying water to get clean water for their families. Another major barrier to development is debt. A lot of these countries have acquired large amounts of debt over time because they've tried to build infrastructure or they've tried to get industry on its feet in their country. And so what we know is there are a couple of groups out there trying to help with foreign debt. One of them is the International Monetary Fund, which they give some of these LEDCs loans that are called structural adjustment loans. And the only way you can get these loans is if you're willing to make huge changes to your economic system. So you actually have to adjust the structure of your economic system to get the money. The World Bank is also out there to help a lot of these LEDCs, and their goal, their mission is to fight poverty. And so, again, though, they're going to require that if the countries want the money, they're going to have to reform and make changes to their government systems. Oftentimes, they require them to go in and actually change their constitution. Both expect the money to be paid back, though, and many have not. So when they go back to those coffers asking for more money, the answer is oftentimes no. And then last but not least, you're always going to have issues with political instability. A lot of these countries have suffered from coups, and that's where you got little groups that are trying to overthrow the government. Sometimes there's economic corruption where the president or the high political advisors are essentially giving money and favors to their friends, and they're not helping the situation any. Now, let's talk a little bit about the cost of economic development. The first one is, of course, industrialization. We know if you look here to build those factories, it's extremely expensive. A lot of your LEDCs in your semi-periphery countries, your newly industrializing countries, have spent a lot of money building export processing zones. And these EPZs are offering low labor costs to the core or MEDC countries of the world, and they say, hey, build here, we'll give you favorable tax breaks, we'll make arrangements that are going to help the wealthy invest in some of these poorer countries. We've seen this be somewhat successful, like in Mexico, they have the maquiladoras. That's an example. In China and Hong Kong, they have huge EPZs where they've built major factories. Of course, there's other costs too, and some of those are environmental costs. It's not all financial or economic costs. If you look like in the bottom picture, we see lots of pollution. Sometimes that's pollution of the water, sometimes that's pollution of the air, but China is suffering from significant pollution as one of these costs. Another cost, of course, has to do with agriculture. A lot of the food in some of the poorer countries in the world is being grown for sale. Instead of growing things that the people can eat and would help their actual situation in their health systems and the overall health of their people, and reduce malnutrition, they're growing luxury crops. So they're growing cotton instead of food. They're growing tea and tobacco or cocoa instead of food. And so why? Because those luxury crops are going to sell better on the international market to countries like us. Another problem is that we are seeing that there are, again, environmental costs here. It's not just all economic costs. Soil erosion is happening, which is leading to desertification. We're seeing soil exhaustion. Also, a lot of these companies are coming in and using pesticides and herbicides, which again are polluting the soil and the water. Next economic cost we want to talk about is the fact that a lot of the poor countries in the world have been investing heavily in tourism because they know that they can make money off of outsiders with tourism. The problem is, though, they only invest in the tourist cities. You can look here and you can see in Brazil, for instance, the top picture shows a beautiful resort in Brazil that has been built. Obviously, millions upon millions of dollars was spent building that. But that takes money away from other programs. If you look in the bottom picture, that's the favelas, and there's actually a video that you should have watched a couple days ago about those, and you can see that the housing standards there are very poor. So you spend millions on this up here, but you're spending nothing to improve the infrastructure here. It's hard on the environment. A lot of times it comes at the cost of the local culture, and again, it just continues to cause problems. So the next thing we want to talk about real quick is how political and economic institutions can help influence and improve some of the unequal developments within the state. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that there are core countries around the world that have poor regions too. We usually see these in either rural areas, or in inner city regions that have been hit really hard by either unemployment or some sort of natural disaster. Semi-periphery and periphery countries are the same way, but it's kind of flip-flop. What we know is that the government can affect this, and they can try to help people deal with this. One of the regions in the United States that I'd like you to look at is Appalachia. This is up in the Appalachian Mountains. In the United States, that is the world's poorest region. You can go there and you can see places in like West Virginia and Kentucky, and they are just suffering from excessive poverty. Please take a second and watch this video so that you can see some of the concerns that we have here in some of our poor regions. Government policies can really help. They can have a huge influence on what is produced agriculturally and industrially. And what we know is that we've seen some governments start to build capital cities, and the capital cities can have huge impacts. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll build these capital cities called forward capitals. and they'll move the capitals off the coast in developed areas and move them into less developed areas. They build a lot of infrastructure, and they hope that it'll bring not just people but industry into these areas. Corporations are also starting to build islands of development, coupled with the state. These are areas where they are spending a lot of money just piling on financial incentives to build up the infrastructure in that area. And so they just pick one spot and they really try to develop it so that industries will want to come and spend their money and develop that area. Once one island of development gets started and moving, then they build another one. This is some of those special economic zones that you heard us mention earlier. You can see there are several islands of development that have been started in sub-Saharan Africa. Notice though, a lot of them are along the coast. All right, they are in coastal regions. What we've seen is that some of those need to really be moved inland, but foreign investment, jobs, infrastructure are all concentrated on these islands of development. The next thing I want to talk about real quick are NGOs, or non-governmental organizations. What we've seen is there has been a lot of push to help, not just from the government side of things, but also from nonprofits, various types of charities. You can see like Red Cross and Red Crescent, Oxfam, Catholic Charities, International Medical Corps. There's been a lot of different groups out there that are working to help improve some of the problems and with development in some of these peripheral countries. They go into, these NGOs go into rural regions especially, and they try to improve the lives of the people. Sometimes it's by digging and helping them build latrines so that they have more sanitary toileting practices. Sometimes it's helping them dig wells. You would be surprised the little things that can be done that improve the lives in a lot of these citizens in a lot of these peripheral countries. But we really see this with different charity organizations coming in to the world's poorest countries. Another thing that has been awesome to help some of the poorer countries around the world are microcredit programs. And micro meaning small and credit meaning loan. Some of the NGOs are especially going into places like Bangladesh or areas of Latin America, and they are giving out loans, small loans, especially to women, because women are underserved, as we know, in the banking industry in a lot of the world's poorest countries. They don't qualify for loans. And so they're wanting to try to start a small business or try to improve their farming techniques, and they don't have the ability to go get a loan from a bank. And so these microcredit programs are awesome. They are giving women in a lot of the world's poorest countries the opportunity to get these loans. Well, there's kind of a contingency though. Hey, you've got to pay back your loan before we can give other people in your community a loan. And so one of the great things about this is the repayment rate is so high because people know that others are depending on them, and it actually has kind of created a teamwork mentality where people, their neighbors, help them get their business or their farm going and doing well and strengthened, because they know that if they do, that'll mean a loan, that they can get a loan quicker through these microcredit programs once it's paid back. Some things that we are noticing that are hurting some of these peripheral countries is the fact that there is a definite gender difference in school enrollment. So what we're seeing is that there are far more males involved in school than in females. You can really see that in some of the peripheral regions of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa, Southwest Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, especially in island Southeast Asia. Remember though, microcredit programs are one of the things that are trying to balance that out. What we're seeing though, remember, is that microcredit programs aren't doing quite as well in areas where there are high mortality rates from AIDS, because if you die, obviously you're not, or you're unhealthy, you're not going to be able to pay back loans. Make sure you take a second here and watch some information about the microcredit programs. The next thing I want to talk to you about is there's actually